When Emma opened the door, she froze. There stood Margaret, her mother-in-law, holding two large suitcases and a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "I guess I'll be staying here for a while," she said. Emma forced a smile, her pulse quickening. It had only been 3 months since she and Daniel got married, and now his mother was moving in unannounced. Daniel hugged his mother, relief washing over him. "Mom, I'm so glad you came." Emma watched in silence. That night, Margaret took over the kitchen. She rearranged the spices, threw away Emma's cheap cookware, and said, "You'll thank me later." Emma clenched her jaw. Later that week, Margaret began making Daniel's favorite dishes, the ones Emma hadn't even learned yet. Every evening, she'd say, "You see." Daniel always loved this, as if to remind Emma that she didn't really know her own husband. When Emma finally spoke up, Daniel laughed it off. "She's just trying to help." But as days passed, the house that once felt like a shared dream began to feel like Margaret's kingdom, and Emma, a guest in her own home. What Emma didn't know yet was that Margaret had no intention of leaving ever. Emma woke up to the smell of coffee, but it wasn't hers. Margaret was already in the kitchen, humming softly as she wiped the counter. "Morning, sweetheart," she said, handing Daniel a cup like she'd done his whole life. Emma's cup wasn't there. "Oh, I didn't know you liked coffee in the morning," Margaret said when Emma glanced around. The day went on with small cuts like that, harmless words that bled quietly. Margaret commented on Emma's job, her clothes, even the way she folded towels. "You'll learn eventually," she'd whisper with a smile. Emma tried to talk to Daniel, but he avoided conflict like it was poison. "She's just adjusting," he said, his eyes glued to his phone. One night, Emma overheard Margaret on the phone. "She's sweet but so young. Daniel needs someone who understands him." Emma's chest tightened. The next morning, she noticed her favorite photo, her wedding day, had disappeared from the living room wall. In its place was an old picture of Daniel and Margaret. When Emma confronted her, Margaret simply said, "It just fits better here." That evening, as Emma lay in bed beside her husband, she realized something chilling. Her silence was giving Margaret power. And if she didn't find her voice soon, she'd lose everything, including Daniel. The house began to feel smaller with every passing day. Emma noticed how Margaret's presence filled every corner. The faint smell of her perfume lingered on the sofa. Her voice echoed through the halls, and her opinions sat heavy at every meal. "You should try using real butter," Margaret said one evening as Emma set the table. Daniel always liked that. Growing up, Emma's hand froze midair. Every suggestion sounded like a reminder that this was Margaret's house, even though it wasn't. Daniel never corrected his mother. He just smiled, pretending not to notice the tension. That night, Emma stood by the kitchen window, staring at her reflection. Her smile looked tired, forced. She couldn't recognize herself anymore. The next day, Margaret decided to help with the laundry. When Emma came home from work, her clothes were already washed and some had shrunk. "You're welcome, dear," Margaret said sweetly. Emma bit her tongue, but later, when she reached into her drawer, she found something that made her blood run cold. Her private journal, open, with a page marked by Margaret's hairpin. On that page were the words, **, sometimes I wonder if Daniel still sees me, **. Emma stormed downstairs, heart pounding. "Did you read this?" she asked, her voice shaking. Margaret didn't flinch. "You left it out," she said calmly. "You shouldn't write things that make your husband doubt you." Emma's throat closed up. She turned to Daniel, searching for support, but he only sighed. "Why do you always think the worst of her?" he said that night as rain hit the windows. Emma realized he wasn't just fighting her mother-in-law. She was fighting to stay visible in her own marriage. Days turned into weeks, and the silence between Emma and Daniel thickened like fog. Every word felt measured, every gesture cautious. Margaret, however, seemed to thrive in the tension. Her footsteps echoed through the house like clockwork, always present. always listening. One evening, Emma overheard Margaret on the phone in the hallway. "I just worrying about him," she whispered. "She doesn't understand Daniel the way I do." She single quotes as ... different. The words sliced through Emma like a blade. She backed away before Margaret could see her and locked herself in the bathroom. Tears streamed down her face. But what hurt most wasn't Margaret's words, it was that Daniel probably believed them. The next morning, Emma tried to act normal. She made breakfast, smiled politely, and pretended not to notice when Margaret rearranged the kitchen again. But something in Emma had shifted. That evening, she asked Daniel to take a walk with her. They ended up at the small park near their old apartment, the one they used to visit before the wedding, when laughter came easily. "Do you even notice what she's doing?" Emma asked quietly. Daniel sighed. "She's my mother, Em. She's just trying to help by reading my journal, but calling me different." Her voice broke. Daniel looked away. "She means well." "You're overreacting." The sentence shattered her last piece of patience. Emma walked ahead, the cool wind biting her cheeks. That night, when she returned home, Margaret was sitting in the living room, knitting by the fire. "Rough evening?" she asked with a smirk. Emma didn't respond. She climbed the stairs, closed the bedroom door, and let herself fall onto the bed. She stared at the ceiling, realizing something painful. Daniel wasn't her safe place anymore. The man who once held her heart now held his mother's, approval closer than her trust. The next day, while folding laundry, Emma found a small envelope slipped into her sweater drawer. Her hands trembled as she opened it. Inside was a photo her and Daniel at their wedding, and on the back, in Margaret's neat handwriting, it said, *, "Some people never learn where they belong." *, Emma's breath caught. She sat on the floor, holding the picture like it might burn her fingers. A part of her wanted to scream. Another part wanted to run. But deep down, a quiet thought began to form, a thought she hadn't dared to entertain before. Maybe she didn't have to stay silent anymore. The next morning, Emma woke before dawn. The house was silent except for the faint ticking of the old clock in the hallway. She stood by the window, watching the first light creep over the rooftops, and made a quiet promise to herself: no more tears, no more begging to be seen. If Daniel couldn't see the truth, she'd stop trying to open his eyes. She'd build her own peace, even if it meant doing it alone. Margaret came downstairs a few hours later, perfectly composed in her silk robe. "You're up early," she said, raising an eyebrow. Emma smiled softly. "Yes, I thought I'd start rearranging the garden." Margaret frowned. "The garden? It's our home," Emma interrupted gently. "I thought a change would be nice." Margaret's lips tightened, but she said nothing. Over the next few days, Emma began reclaiming small pieces of her life. She moved her favorite books into the living room, repainted the guest room, and started cooking her own recipes instead of Margaret's old traditions. Each act, though small, felt like a rebellion, a quiet declaration that she still existed. Daniel didn't seem to notice much at first, but Margaret did. She started leaving sharper comments, carefully disguised as concern. "You've been so busy lately," she'd say. "I hope you're not neglecting Daniel." Emma would just smile. "He's fine." "We both are." One evening, while cleaning the garden, Emma found herself humming a tune she hadn't sung in years. It felt good, light, almost free. Then she noticed Margaret watching from the kitchen window, her expression unreadable. Later that night, Daniel confronted her. "Mom says you've been ... distant." Emma looked at him, tired but calm. "I'm not distant, Daniel. I'm just done apologizing for existing." He stared at her, like he didn't recognize her anymore. That night, when Margaret went to bed, Emma sat at the kitchen table and opened her laptop. For the first time in months, she started writing again, stories, letters, pieces of herself she had hidden away. It was something that belonged only to her. By midnight, the first short story was finished. She read it twice, tears in her eyes, and whispered to the empty room. "I'm still here." Upstairs, Daniel slept soundly. Margaret dreamed of control, but downstairs, in the quiet glow of her computer screen, Emma was beginning to build something new, something no one could take away this time. The following week, something shifted inside Emma. She no longer waited for Daniel's approval or Margaret's permission. Each morning she woke up earlier than both of them, brewed her own coffee, and sat at her desk to write before the world intruded. Her words became her armor, her rebellion, and her truth. One of her short stories was inspired by a woman trapped in her own house, a story that mirrored her life more than she dared admit. She posted it anonymously online, not expecting anything. Within a few days, it was shared hundreds of times. Comments poured in. "This hit me so hard. I feel this woman's pain. It's like you wrote about my life." Emma read them all in silence, her heart pounding. For the first time in years, she felt seen. Margaret, however, could sense the shift. The more Emma smiled, the more restless Margaret became. "You've been spending too much time alone," she remarked one evening. "Daniel deserves your full attention." Emma didn't argue this time. She just nodded, and that silence unsettled Margaret more than any argument could. Daniel, caught in between, grew distant, confused by his mother's whispers and his wife's quiet confidence. One night, he found Emma in her study, typing furiously. "What are you writing?" he asked. "Something real," she replied without looking up. "About people who forget who they are." He hesitated. "Are you writing about us?" Emma finally turned to him, her voice calm. If the truth fits, the tension between them became unbearable after that. Margaret saw it as a victory. She thought Emma's silence meant surrender, but she couldn't have been more wrong. One afternoon, when Margaret was at her weekly bridge club, Emma packed a small suitcase and went to stay at a friend's cottage by the lake. She left only a note, "I need air," that evening. Daniel came home to find his mother furious. "She left," Margaret hissed, "after everything I'd done for her." Daniel didn't answer. For the first time, he wondered what exactly his mother had done. Meanwhile, by the lake, Emma sat watching the sunset, her laptop open beside her. Her next story was already forming, a story about a woman who finally walked away. The cottage was small, quiet, and surrounded by tall pines that whispered when the wind passed through. For the first time in years, Emma felt like she could breathe. She spent her mornings walking by the lake, her afternoons writing, and her nights sitting by the fire, watching the reflection of flames dance on the glass. She didn't miss the big house, the tension, or the silence that always followed Margaret's words. What she missed, though, was the version of Daniel she used to know, the man who once laughed freely, who believed in her. But maybe that version existed only in memory. One evening, she received an email notification. Her latest story had gone viral. Thousands of shares, comments, and even a few offers from small publishers. The story's title was simple: "The House That Wasn't a Home." Emma smiled through tears. It was her truth, hidden in fiction. 2 days later, Daniel showed up at the cottage. He looked tired, older somehow. "You just left," he said quietly. "No goodbye." Emma looked at him from the porch. "Would you have let me go if I did?" He didn't answer. Instead, he walked closer, his voice soft. "Mom says you've changed." Emma laughed bitterly. "I stopped being who she wanted me to be." Daniel looked away. "She just wants what's best." Emma's expression hardened. "No, she wants control. And you let her have it." The words hung in the air between them, sharp and cold. Daniel opened his mouth to argue, but nothing came out. For the first time, he had no defense. He left that night without saying another word. Emma stood in the doorway long after his car disappeared down the road, feeling both pain and relief. The next morning, she woke up to find an envelope slipped under her door. It was from Daniel. Inside was a short note. "I'm sorry. I don't know who I am without her." Emma stared at the paper for a long time, then folded it and placed it in her journal. She didn't cry. She just whispered to herself, "Neither did I, but now I do." She walked outside, feeling the cold morning air brush against her skin. The lake shimmered under the sun, endless and new just like her future. Winter came early that year. The lake froze, and the trees stood silent beneath the weight of snow. Emma's cottage had become her sanctuary, a place filled with quiet strength. Every morning, she'd light a candle by the window and whisper a small prayer of gratitude, not for what she had lost, but for what she had found, herself. One day, as she sifted through her inbox, an email caught her eye. It was from a major publishing house. They wanted to adapt her story into a book series. Emma's hands trembled as she read the words again and again. For the first time in years, someone wanted her story not to control it, but to celebrate it. She signed the contract within a week. When the announcement went public, social media erupted. People began to speculate about the mysterious author behind the house that wasn't a home. Some guessed it was fiction. Others sensed the truth beneath the words. Then one afternoon, a message appeared in her mailbox, no sender. Just handwriting she recognized instantly. It was Margaret. Emma hesitated before opening it. Inside, a single page read, "You've embarrassed this family. I hope you're proud." Emma stared at the words until they blurred. Her heart didn't ache like it once would have. Instead, she felt a strange calm. She took the letter, tore it in half, and fed it to the fire. The paper curled and turned to ash. Later that evening, her phone rang. It was Daniel again. His voice was quiet, strained. "She's not well," he said. "She keeps talking about you." Emma closed her eyes, listening to the crackle of the fireplace. "I can't be who she wants anymore, Daniel," she said softly. "And you shouldn't either." Silence lingered for a while before Daniel whispered, "Maybe you're right." When the call ended, Emma sat back in her chair. Outside, snowflakes drifted past the window like tiny pieces of peace. For the first time, she didn't feel anger or guilt or fear. She felt free. She had faced her past, and this time, it hadn't won. She opened her laptop and began typing a new story. Its title came easily, Becoming Unbroken. The weeks passed quietly. Emma's book was everywhere now, on shelves, in cafes, in the hands of strangers who saw themselves in her pain and strength. She had interviews lined up, podcasts asking for her voice, and emails from women who wrote, "You told my story." Each message reminded her why she had endured everything. But one morning, a knock at the door shattered the stillness. When she opened it, Daniel stood there again, this time alone, snow dusting his coat. His eyes were red, tired. "She's gone," he said simply. Emma froze. "Your mother." He nodded. "Heart failure." It was sudden. For a moment, neither spoke. The world outside was silent, except for the soft wind brushing through the pines. Emma felt a rush of conflicting emotions: grief, relief, guilt, even gratitude. Daniel stepped forward. "She read your book," he said quietly, "before she died. She said maybe she was too hard on you." Emma's breath caught in her throat. She turned away, tears filling her eyes. "It doesn't change what happened," she whispered. "No," Daniel said. "But maybe it changes what comes next." They sat inside for hours, not as husband and wife, not as enemies, just two people who had shared years of love and loss. When Daniel left, he didn't ask her to come back. He just said, "Take care of yourself, Em." She smiled faintly. "You too." After he was gone, Emma walked to the lake, where the ice was beginning to crack with the first signs of spring. She thought about Margaret not as the cruel woman who had tried to control her, but as someone broken by her own fears. Emma whispered to the wind, "I forgive you." It wasn't for Margaret's peace. It was for her own. As she stood there, the sun broke through the clouds, scattering light across the frozen water. Emma closed her eyes, feeling warmth return to a place she once thought would always be cold. She had finally let go, not just of them, but of the version of herself that believed she had to please everyone to be loved. Months later, the world looked different to Emma, not because it had changed, but because she finally had. The warmth of early summer filled the air, and her garden was alive with colors she'd planted herself. Each flower felt like a piece of her rebirth, growing from the soil of everything she had endured. The book tour had ended, her story had touched thousands, and she had declined every flashy TV deal that tried to turn her pain into entertainment. She didn't need validation anymore. She was finally enough for herself. One afternoon, as she was tidying her writing desk, she found the old note Daniel had left months ago. Asterisk, I don't know who I am without her. Asterisk. She smiled gently and whispered, maybe now you'll find out. She placed the note in a box, with her other memories, the ones that no longer hurt to touch. Later that day, she received a letter from a woman in her 60s. The letter said, your story saved my life. I thought I was alone. Emma read those words slowly, tears forming in her eyes, realizing that every bit of her suffering had become someone else's light. That night, she sat by the lake again, this time under a sky filled with stars. The reflection shimmered across the calm water, like thousands of tiny hopes waiting to be born. She whispered to the dark, thank you for breaking me just enough to build me again. A soft breeze brushed against her cheek, almost like a response. She looked toward her cottage, the lights warm and steady, and for the first time in a long time, she didn't feel like she was surviving, she was living. Tomorrow, she'd start her next story, not about pain, but about healing. The title had already formed in her mind. Asterisk, the woman who came home to herself. Asterisk. She smiled as she closed her notebook, knowing that this time, the ending belonged entirely to her. Sometimes, the people who lose everything are the ones who finally find themselves. Emma's story isn't just about heartbreak, it's about rebirth, courage, and learning to stand alone in a world that told her she couldn't. If you've ever felt forgotten, broken, or underestimated, remember this: your healing doesn't have to be loud to be powerful. Thank you for watching. If her journey touched you, share this story with someone who needs a little light today. And never forget, sometimes walking away is how you finally come home.